Welcome to the Great Canadian Piggy Bank, helping Canadian parents raise money smart kids. Today's episode is about how to prepare for the rising cost of post-secondary school. I'm joined by Dan Bortolotti, co-host of the Rational Reminder podcast, one of Canada's top finance shows. He is also a financial planner for PWL, and before all of this, he was the managing editor of Today's Parent magazine. Dan, I'm so excited and honored to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay, so before we even get into how to fund post-secondary schooling, there's a bigger question that a lot of parents are asking these days. Is post-secondary education even worth the cost anymore? With rising tuition and the fact that not every graduate is going to be guaranteed a high-paying job, should we think about the return on investment of higher education?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not just a financial question. I think it really comes down to your values as a parent and what kind of kids you're trying to raise. If the cost wasn't an issue, I think we can all agree it's time well spent. But there is an inclination for a lot of parents to think about it as an investment. It's going to cost me $80,000 for a college education for my son or daughter, and are they going to get a return on that investment? I say that the college route is becoming increasingly appealing now because it's quite a bit less expensive than more academic colleges and probably better job training for most people. I do think that post-secondary education is still worth it. You have to make sure that it's a program that's appropriate to you and that you're legitimately engaged in it. But trying to find well-paying jobs with only a high school education is going to be challenging. So if you have the means, then yes, I would say it's worth it.
Yeah, I agree. I was looking into it last night. My daughter's 13. So if she goes right out of high school, she'd be going in 2031. And right now they're estimating a 4-year university degree will be about $110,000 for tuition, books, food, rent, all up. If it's just tuition and books, it looks like it'll be about $50K. But yeah, I was quite surprised by that.
It's a big number. And I always say to people, though, that I think it's important to put some of that in context because remember that as you raise a child, you have a lot of expenses already. And so when your child gets to university, they're not all new expenses, right? You've been paying for their clothes and their food and their activities their whole lives. And that isn't necessarily going to increase when they go to university. So when you tack that on to the cost of university, it sometimes exaggerates the true cost because it's just a cost you've been bearing as a parent for the last 18 years anyway. And as you point out, like if you just look at tuition and books, the number's quite a bit smaller. The solution there for a lot of people, again, depends where you live, but is to try to look for an opportunity to live at home, right? It's half the cost, maybe less.
Yeah, I want to look at 3 different scenarios of savings for kids. One where we've taken advantage of the RESPs from as soon as the child's born and we've maxed them out. A middle ground where we've saved probably half for university and we have to figure out the next half. And the other one scenario is we haven't saved anything. So I want to go through those 3 different scenarios with you. And as a financial planner, get your opinion on how can different parents plan for this and just not be deer in headlights. I'm so stressed out. I don't know what to do. So let's look at scenario 1. You've been saving an RESP since they've been born. So for listeners who aren't familiar, can you explain what an RESP is and why it's such a powerful tool in Canada?
Sure.
And this is especially for people who are new to Canada as well.
So an RESP, or a Registered Education Savings Plan, is a type of account that the government has created that allows parents to set aside funds for their children's education. And it supports that goal in a couple of ways. The first one is that funds contributed to an RESP are eligible for a government grant, typically 20% of the contribution, up to a maximum of $500 a year. If you have the means and you're able to give your child a head start, you can put $2,500 a year into the RESP starting the year they're born, and you get a $500 grant. So right off the top, you're getting a 20% return on your initial investment, and you can continue doing that every year. Then there's a lifetime maximum up to $7,200 per child per lifetime in grants that you can receive. So that's the first way. The other way that the RESP is valuable is that it allows you to invest in the account, and all of the investment growth is tax-free until the child starts university. So you can get, 18, 19 years of tax-free growth out of the account. That's a lot of compounding without paying tax. And then when you start withdrawals from the RESP, the original contributions you made are always tax-free, but those grants that you receive from the government and any growth on the investments are taxable, but they're taxable in the hands of your child, not you. And that's really important because your child probably doesn't have other income. Even if they have a summer job or something, they're probably making little or perhaps no income at all. And at a very, very low level of taxable income, you actually don't even pay any tax. So if you're able to take out 10, 15, even $20,000 a year, and that income is attributed to your child in university, they may pay no tax on it at all. So it's a really valuable account type that I typically recommend for parents, who have a little extra funds to put aside. Open one up as soon as your child's born and start trying to make those contributions.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so once you start investing inside the RESP, how should we think about our investments? Should it be more conservative? Would you do ETFs? Would you be more risky with high riskier stocks? Like what is because it's a shorter time frame than your 30, 40 years to retirement.
Yeah. So you can take a significant amount of risk in an RESP when your child is very young because, as we said, you've got 15 to 18 years or so before the first withdrawals need to be made. So you have the opportunity to take some risk, with stocks. And this is just a general principle. I don't recommend buying individual stocks for any investor. I prefer much more diversified, low cost index funds or ETFs.
Agreed.
And the key here, though, is I would suggest that you consider using what we in the industry call a glide path with the investments. And what that means is when you're young or early on, you can take significantly more risk. Maybe your portfolio in the RESP is even 100% stocks, but maybe 90 or 80%. And then as the child gets older, you have to reduce that risk over time. So maybe by the time they're in grade 7, grade 8, you're down to, 50 or 60% stocks. By the time they get to high school, you really want to dial back the risk because now you're only a few years away from needing the money. So typically as a child gets into high school, when we're managing an RESP, we will often have virtually the whole portfolio at that point in GICs, savings products, like very conservative. So they're earning, interest, but there's virtually zero chance of loss. And the reason for that is pretty simple, right? If you have saved your whole child's life for education, and we have an event like the 2008, 2009 crash, where the stock market fell 50% in 6 months, you don't want that happening when your child's in grade 12 and about to start university and half your RESP gets wiped out before they start school. So it really makes sense to reduce that risk as they get closer to needing the money, and then you can be sure that it will be there when they enroll.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Okay, well, so that's a good segue into our scenario 2, where because I feel like I'm now falling into this after saving since she's been born. So scenario 2, you've saved some, but you haven't saved enough, maybe a half, if not a little bit more. So this is a more common situation for a lot of parents today. If a family has a shortfall, what are some ways that they can bridge the gap without jeopardizing their own retirement?
So there's a few ways you can do it. The obvious one is having the student pay some of their own costs, and that means summer jobs. It might mean for some people, it's not ideal, but working while they're at university. So, if you can get them to contribute to the cost themselves, paying for their own food, right? Paying for their own room and board. That would be ideal. Student loans, of course, are another option for many people. Sometimes they are based on financial need and other times not necessarily. Depends where the loan comes from. And, we can talk about more about student loans later, but not necessarily a bad option, right? If the alternative is not getting the education at all. In terms of parents helping bridge the gap, without jeopardizing their own retirement, this is a challenging one. It depends a lot, I think, on the individual's circumstances. I think it's fine to dip into your own savings, your longer term savings, to help pay for a child's education in some circumstances. So we're probably not talking about withdrawals from your RRSP, because those are taxable and you never get that contribution room back. That's really a last resort. That money truly is there for your retirement. But if you have TFSAs, for example, that's a possibility. Dip into the TFSAs. Those withdrawals are not taxable. And more importantly, you get that contribution room back. So if you have to take $10,000 out of your TFSA to help your child, you can recontribute that at some future date. And this option is most suited for younger parents. Now, if you have your kids when you're in your late 30s, that's more difficult to do, right? Because by the time your kids are starting university, you might only be a few years from retirement, and now you don't really have that runway. So that's a very individual situation, but something to think about, for younger parents.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very Vancouver example, but I think it also applies to Toronto. Some families are house rich, but cash poor. Does it ever make sense to tap into home equity to help pay for school? And what are the risks around that?
I would look at that the same way I would look at any other kind of debt. If you happen to have a house that, let's say the mortgage on your home is only 25% of the value of the home. It's a relatively modest mortgage. I don't think it's unreasonable to lean on that a little bit in order to help your kids get a good education. If you're already mortgaged to the hilt and those mortgage payments are causing you a lot of grief, they already represent more than half of your take-home pay, something like that, I would be very reluctant to recommend adding to that debt load. It really comes down to kind of what you can comfortably manage. And I would look at this in a similar way to borrowing from your own savings, in that, again, if you're kind of younger, you have good earning potential, and you take on a little bit of debt now, but you'll catch up on it later, and you're confident that you will, and that the debt won't just keep spiraling. It's reasonable enough. It's just proceed with caution.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any other strategies that you would think about topping up for the last couple of years of school? Or do you think it's just about managing expectations with your kid at this point?
Yeah, it's managing them. I would say too, in terms of the RESP, I would not recommend topping it up. So sometimes people will say that, my child's in high school and we have some RESP room that we haven't used yet. It really depends. I mean, if you can make one last contribution and capture some grant money, it is worth it to do it for the grant money. Let's get the maximum grant and then leave it there. But otherwise, yeah, it really becomes a choice of what kind of education you feel you can afford based on what you've saved.
Yeah. Maybe it's living at home. Those are definitely conversations a lot of parents are having. I mean, in Vancouver, we've got UBC, we've got SFU, we've got BCIT, we've got some great options here in the city. So it's definitely more doable.
I think it's the last thing I would say on that note is the RESP program is extremely flexible in what is eligible for RESP withdrawals. So people will ask me all the time, what happens if my son or daughter doesn't go to university or even college? Do I lose the money? And I mean, the answer is no, but the more nuanced answer is it doesn't even need to be university or college. Apprenticeship programs are often eligible. If you go to a trade school, I've even heard of people using RESPs like to buy tools and things that they would need for a trade program. So it's not just that you have to go to some, academic institution. It can be any post-secondary training. And there's a long list of eligible schools that you can look up online.
When do you have to have cashed out your RESPs by? How old's the child?
It's 35 years after the account was opened.
Wow.
The short answer is that it's not like as soon as your child is 22, the normal age of graduating, if you haven't gone to school, you have to shut down the account. You
Amazing.
can take a gap year. You can work for a few years. You can decide not to go to school out of high school and then change your mind when you're in your 20s and go back. It's fine. You just need to keep that RESP open, and it continues to grow tax-free until then. There is ultimately a limit at which point the account does have to be collapsed. And if your child doesn't use or doesn't enroll in a post-secondary institution, they do have to pay back that grant money to the government, but you get your original contributions back. You don't get to keep all of the tax-free investment growth. I should stress that. But if you put in $20,000, you can withdraw $20,000.
Yeah. That's terrific. So if your child is 17 and you're starting at zero, what are your options to fund education without going broke?
So I wish there were easy answers here. It's basically the same answers as scenario 2, where you haven't saved enough, just to a greater extent, right? Really, I think the only options here are to potentially look for a program that is not especially expensive, right? So like some kind of local college, as opposed to the bigger universities that are going to have more reasonable tuition, some kind of jobs and expectations on the student themselves, to defer some or defray some of that cost, and student loans. Right. I mean, in this scenario, it sounds like the family would qualify for loans that are based on financial means. And so these are options for kids, especially kids who are good students, really would thrive in post-secondary education. And the only reason they're not able to go is financial. Those are the kids that the loans make sense for.
Okay, so then in closing, looking across all these 3 scenarios, whether they started saving early, started late, or didn't start at all, what's the one thing you want every parent to think about when it comes to paying for post-education? If they walk away, what is the one thing they should think about from this episode?
Yeah. The most important thing is to involve your child in the decision-making process, and to some extent that financial decision. I think it's worth them understanding how much an education costs, and it's worth letting them know what you're going to contribute, what you're able to contribute, what you want them to contribute. And again, I think it's important, to try to get them to do that, and make sure that you are all entering into this decision confidently and enrolling in a program that they find genuinely engaging. Because if you want to talk about what the worst educational investment is, especially if you're borrowing and spending tens of thousands of dollars to put your child into a education program that they don't really love, they're just doing it because they're trying to meet their parents' expectations. And at the end of it, either they don't finish, or they do finish and move on to something totally unrelated, and all of that time and money ends up being wasted. So that kind of skin in the game and that engagement with the decision making on the student's part, I think is going to be helpful, whether you're paying for the whole thing or only a part of it.
I also heard another scenario from a parent, which I thought was brilliant, but I realized maybe I was taught too hardline. But it was more, we will pay for your education, but if you fail any classes, you have to pay us back for that class. And it's to that point where it's like, if a kid's going in without skin in the game, it's a way of getting them to have skin in the game and still pay for their education. Does that make sense? So
I actually think that's a great idea. I mean, even you'll find even in the workplace sometimes, for example, there'll be similar incentives, right? Like we'll pay for an employee's training program, but only if they pass the course. Totally. So I think the same idea applies here, right? It's, other kids might feel like, well, I'm not going to put much effort into this course. It's not costing me anything if I fail it. So it's not a bad motivator. And I don't really think that that's kind of hard line at all. I think that's just logical consequences, right?
Yeah. I think I like it too. This was amazing, Dan. I really enjoyed our conversation. You've given me a lot of great insights, and I know parents are going to listen to this, and I think it's going to calm, I know, quite a few of my friends down. That university is a year to 2 years away for them. Yeah. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, so we covered a lot today. I'm going to summarize the 3 scenarios that we talked about. Scenario 1, where you save in an RESP from birth. So start when they're born, contribute $2,500 a year to get the full $500 yearly government grant, and your child's education can be largely covered without financial stress. Scenario 2, you've saved some, but not enough. So here you're going to look at bridging the gap with a mix of your kids contributing, potentially use some of your TFSA, and also setting some realistic expectations about costs with your kid. The last scenario is you haven't saved at all for their post-secondary education. So focus on affordable school options here. You can also look at student loans, grants, scholarship, and also shared responsibility with your child. Planning late is harder, but it's never too late to make a good plan. The one main point on all three scenarios is make sure you bring your kid into the overall conversation so that they fully understand what the costs are going to be, what you're going to cover, what they need to cover. I think this is a really great opportunity for them to understand budgets, saving for a large expense, and potentially what good debt looks like. If you liked today's episode, please subscribe and share it with other parents, and let me know what other topics you'd love to hear about. I'm Christi Rae, and this is the Great Canadian Piggy Bank, helping Canadian parents raise money-smart kids.